Relatively speaking, Norwood 3 is not a bad place to be. Hey guys, it's Robert of hairlossdaily.com. Why I decided to make my first couple videos with the worst breakout I've had in the last 15 years or so is a little bit beyond me, but it's either a sign of courage or stupidity, I guess. So let's get to it. The nice thing about a Norwood 3, that's the subject of today's hairline, is that you still have style options. There's a good chance your hair loss is the treatable variety, and it's like a super common type of hair loss. It often just goes totally undetected by the general public. This video will be a survival guide of sorts. We'll go over the classification, the treatment options, if you want to go that way, a few style tips, and more. So this will be just their Norwood 3 overview. So the classification, we'll start with that. I'll give you a quick look at the Norwood 3, what it looks like. Alright, that is the Norwood 3 hairline there. You can see it. Just some significant recession at the temple area there, basically, is what it entails. There's probably the best shot. You know, the classic variety of the Norwood 3 is kind of an island of hair surrounded by a bald ocean. Richard Nixon would be an example. Sting, well, I'll get into all that a little bit more later. But yeah, that's the basic classification, I guess. It's more than just a type 2, some little bit of triangular recession. It goes beyond that. In my experience, now this is just a sort of a hair loss geek perspective here. I'm not a doctor, but I've observed 5 variations of the Norwood 3. You could call a couple of them like severe Norwood 2 variations. We're getting into the weeds a little bit here as it is. We'll say the first type of shape is the M shape. That's kind of it's not a full-blown, you could call it a kind of a advanced type 2 pattern if you wanted. Like it just kind of collapses in a little bit, the hairline basically. You see a lot of guys with this. Tom Hanks, I suppose, would be an example. Jimmy Fallon kind of has a little bit of an M going. It's not really noticeable. This is like, you're never gonna be classified as balding necessarily with this, and a lot of times that stays fairly stable, that M shape. That's another kind of mild receding hairline. You don't see it quite as often. Bryan Cranston's a good example of a celebrity. You can see it when he shaves his head. The hairline just goes in a little bit more than your typical like mature hairline, and he's got great hair for his age, so he's doing fine. Mitt Romney was another example that I noticed in the last election cycle. It kind of recedes a little bit, but it's like you could call this like a distinguished type of recession. It's not much recession at all. Extra large V shape. All right, we're still in the hairline weeds. Some men maintain like more of a mature hairline shape, which is sort of a soft V. But it just recedes beyond that point where it could probably be considered a mature hairline. It's just a little bit too high, and it probably indicates they've lost a little ground. You can see it all that often. Conan O'Brien is someone who would maybe consider to have that type of hairline. And then number 4, the bald spot type 3. That's basically any of these variations with a bald spot in the back. It's not quite as common, but you do see it. And then the Norwood 3A. That's like this, just a variation of the Norwood pattern with a little bit more loss up front versus on the sides. All right, so Norwood 3, your treatment options. You're going to have a lot of treatment options if you want to go that route. What's best is probably going to be dependent on the following. Your genes, first off, if you're really destined to go bald, you want to determine if Norwood 3 is just going to be a quick pit stop, or if you're going to be moving to balder destinations quickly. That can be done via a miniaturization exam with a doctor, and just by reviewing your genetic history a little bit. Usually you can kind of predict your future to some extent by looking at some of your close relatives, seeing where they're at relative to where you are at your age. It's a little more useful if you're a little older than if you're younger, but you can predict it a little bit like that. And then degree of thinning, if it's really going on you. Some people may have a Norwood 3, but they're actually balding in a more advanced pattern than that if you view it under a microscope. So those are the factors mainly to consider. Also age. The younger you are, the more likely it is to kind of not be a pit stop and be a significant balding pattern at some point. All right, so the 6 main the main treatments are as follows. We'll start with finasteride. The American Hair Loss Association calls it the best first line of attack against pattern hair loss. It can stop or dramatically slow the process 90% of the time. It also has those side effects. You're familiar with them. They're pretty rare overall. I've spent probably hundreds of hours reviewing the side effect profile of this drug. You know, that said, this may be a little bit of an extreme option in my view if you just have a receding hairline going, and you're especially if you're like older and you don't necessarily have any bald relatives. Might be a little bit much to be altering your hormones over the course of decades, to be considering this. But it's a well-tolerated medication. It's just has those undesirable side effects, unfortunately, that a small percentage of users get. And, just the idea of altering androgens over the course of decades makes me uncomfortable personally. I know it makes a lot of you uncomfortable probably. It's still something I'd consider ultimately. But I guess that's treatment number one. Well, I'll do some more Propecia videos in the near future, I'm sure. Number two, minoxidil. That can thicken and revitalize your thinning follicles. Old Faithful. It's been helping guys avoid premature baldness since forever, basically, or 1988 if you want to get specific. It's been around forever. Helped multiple generations of men avoid their genetic fates and enjoy convertible rides into retirement, as I said in a recent article. In a 2012 study with had 984 participants, minoxidil was shown to be moderately to very effective in 84% of participants. Stats vary a little bit. I think it starts around like 60% of guys, I think is kind of the minimum, respond either, in a semi-favorably or very favorably manner to minoxidil. It's not going to totally it doesn't address the root cause of hair loss is the problem with minoxidil, why a lot of people recommend Propecia finasteride is the first line of attack. But if your hair loss is of the more moderate variety, mild to moderate variety, it might be a better option for you. It's totally your call, ultimately. Laser therapy, that's a relatively new treatment. It's more of a supplementary option at this point, I would say. If you're using it with a proven remedy like finasteride or minoxidil, it may be great. But you probably shouldn't go all in on this treatment. That's my interpretation of it anyway so far in reviewing the research. The studies are small and they indicate that it has some limited effectiveness for hair loss. It's not going to lead to tremendous regrowth, I don't think, contrary to what some of the testimonials show online and some of the lasers themselves claim. But it can help a little bit based on what I've read. PRP, this one's expensive. I probably wouldn't go this route with a simple receding hairline. It's another one that leads to temporary gain. Some doctors are claiming they can get long-lasting results. I'm very skeptical of those claims, and but some people are definitely seeing regrowth with this. And the nice thing about it is it happens pretty quickly with PRP. And it's relatively risk-free, so it has its benefits and it has its place, but I don't think it's something the majority of people with receding hairlines should probably be looking at. It's my personal opinion. 5, the natural route. Yeah, I wrote this a while ago. That's probably not very viable. There are definitely some natural treatments that can help a little bit, but you probably shouldn't. I wouldn't go on use any of those without using a more proven one in conjunction with that natural remedy. There's pumpkin seed oil, saw palmetto, rosemary oil, a few others. They show some promise, but they're far from proven as long-term options. And number 6, hair transplantation. This is often a great option for Norwood 3 patients, if you want to call it that, if it bothers you. If it doesn't, it's fine. It's no big deal. But if you just have a little bit of a receding hairline, it's a type of hairline type of hair loss that's not advanced enough to need having multiple surgeries. Most likely, you can probably address it in one procedure, which is a nice benefit to being on the mild end of the hair loss spectrum. Whereas if you're Norwood 4 or 5, you're probably looking at realistically a couple procedures to get decent coverage up there. There's a whole host of factors to consider here. A lot of you know, bad surgeons out there, a lot of bad advice out there. So, do your due diligence before you consider that route. But it's certainly viable. A lot of surgeons are doing great work, and people are achieving life-changing results for sure. Kind of some stylistic options with the receding hairline. Just a few tips. Bangs are your friend. They can, help cover the problem areas. Long hair still might be an option. Think you can't rock long hair because you're a Norwood 3? Think again. Many Norwood 3s actually look great with long hair. I call it the receding hairline rocker look. Look at somebody like Joe Walsh and the Eagles, Timothy B. Schmidt, Tom Petty when he was alive. They had receding hairlines. They rocked the long hair, and they kind of had it toward the middle, and you didn't even really notice it. So as long as there isn't a dramatic amount of thinning, you don't want to get into the, you don't want to rock the Crosby. To have a Crosby look where you're just kind of looking like you're trying to compensate for something by growing it out. That's a bad look, in my opinion. But if you still have some decent density up top, that's long hair still an option. When in doubt, keeping it clean is probably a good look. I see a lot of guys my age who are kind of buzzing their heads with Norwood 3s, which may be a little bit of a overkill in my opinion, but whatever makes you happy. But if it's kind of a sloppy Norwood 3 with a lot of thinning and a buzz cut, or a shorter haircut might be better. Shorter hair can actually disguise thinning a little bit more effectively than longer hair in some cases. It then depends on the person, hair type, a variety of other things. Number 4, seek professional help. You can get, a barber, can help you kind of maximize your look in spite of your limitations. All right, now I'm going to go over a few inspirations for you, just to show you that you can live a full life as a Norwood 3. Roger Federer, perhaps the greatest tennis player ever. He doesn't let his receding hairline slow him down. Does it make him look any less suave? No. Norwood 3 pattern, it still frames the face. That's another nice thing about the Norwood 3. It looks great. Andy Murray, the other tennis player, I think he's retired, he has a similar pattern, but his hair doesn't look anywhere near as good as Roger's. Number 2, Sting. Sting's had a super receded Norwood 3 pattern for decades now, and he's about as good a looking as a 60-something man gets. He's probably pushing 70 now. He looked good in his 30s and 40s too. He still had the receding hairline. He changes things up. He tries different styles, long and short. He always looks great in spite of the recession. Kiefer Sutherland, he's had a receding hairline for as long as I can remember, and it adds to his masculinity, if anything. Tom Hiddleston, I wrote this a while ago. I wrote that he's the latest in Taylor Swift's long line of famous exes. He's a very mild. A lot of you guys would call this a type 2. I might even too. It's kind of an advanced type 2. Like, he kind of lets the bangs fall forward a little bit. It works for him. He's a suave devil for sure. Tom Hanks, number 5. Of course, the guy who's maintained that receding hairline for ages, since Sleepless in Seattle. He's never really someone who the public is going to consider balding. That's the thing I think to keep in mind the most with Norwood 3. It's not really something that most people are going to notice. The average movie fan in the 90s, when they were going to see a Tom Hanks film, I doubt they were paying attention to his hairline. It's the talent was what brought them into the seats. I'll show a quick infographic I made a while ago now. Hair Loss Daily presents 5 reasons why Norwood 3 is a great place to be. Norwood 3 is a receding hairline, but it's not the end of the world. It's a good place to be because, 1, it's normal. Norwood 3 indicates some significant recession at the temples, but it's a normal degree of hair loss at pretty much any age. 2, hard to spot. Real life occurs in the real world, not in a hair loss form. Most people aren't paying attention to your hairline. 3, it's treatable. If you catch your hair loss at the Norwood 3 stage, chances are you can treat it if desired. Hair transplants can fill in the gaps if needed. 4, it's manageable. You still have many options with a receding hairline. Talk to your barber or stylist to find a look that works for you. 5, GQ worthy. Countless Norwood 3 men have graced the pages of GQ, like Roger Federer, Sting, Kiefer Sutherland, to name a few. All right, wrapping it up. If you have a Norwood 3, you're not alone, and relatively speaking, you're in a good place. Most people don't have super acute receding hairline radars. Women certainly aren't going to notice. Non-balding men certainly aren't going to be paying attention. Moderate hair loss often isn't detective either. And Norwood 3, it's more on the mild end of the spectrum. When the time comes, you can always buzz your head. That's a viable option to consider too. Yeah, but for now, I think you're doing okay, and you may as well keep your hair for a while, because as I said earlier, Norwood 3, it's nothing to be ashamed of. That concludes this video. I'm Robert, hairlossdaily.com. I'll put a link to my Norwood 3 article in the description if you're interested, and I'll talk to you next time.